Welcome back to the last session at the Power Lounge. Have you all had a good couple of days? On behalf of Emerge and the Meteor, we've just been so happy to host you here and honored to hear these incredible conversations. And I cannot imagine a better conversation to be ending with. For you on the live stream watching, we are going into our final conversation after 2 days. And it is about a truly profound subject that doesn't get discussed often enough, especially around election time. And that is what elections mean for gender violence, an issue that affects so many of us and yet sometimes seems kind of divorced from the political process. There's no one better to talk about it than our next panelists. The first is our moderator, Dr. Salamishah Tillet. She is a professor at Rutgers University. She is the co-founder of the organization A Long Walk Home, and she is the Pulitzer Prize-winning contributing cultural critic at the New York Times. Not incidentally, she is also the co-host, along with me, of a podcast called Because of Anita, which leads us to her conversational companion today. Professor Anita Hill is a professor at Brandeis University and the author of multiple books, most recently, Believing, Our 30-Year Journey to End Gender Violence, a journey that I would add she has truly led. Please welcome Dr. Salamishah Tillet and Professor Anita Hill.
Good afternoon. Thank you.
So it's my true honor to be here with you on this auspicious occasion, this unimaginable moment here in Chicago on the eve of, Vice President Kamala Harris's address at the Democratic National Convention. So my name is Salamishah Tillet, and you heard a lot of wonderful things about me from Cindy. But I think the thing that I would like to say to Anita, as many of us who came of age in the late 90s, or early 90s and in 2000s, we owe so much to you. And I've spent time talking to you and writing about you and reading about you, but I don't think that I've ever been able to fully let you know how watching you testify before the nation when I was a senior in high school fully changed what I understood the possibilities of Black feminism could be and the pitfalls that were going to await me and millions of girls who look like me in the future. So thank you for just being the most amazing Anita Hill. And I'm just honored to be in conversation with you today. So.
Oh, listen, the honor and the pleasure is mine. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled just to be here at this moment in history, and I'm sure some of you are as well. I think maybe all of you are, correct? And you mentioned Black feminism, and I think we have to really honor how we get to this day.
Yeah.
And it doesn't just happen overnight. It felt like it did, really, overnight. But it comes from years and years of women, Black women, building up to this moment where you have a country that is ready to embrace the idea of a Black woman president. That doesn't happen by chance. It happens because so many people have contributed to it. And when I think about it, I think about the people who I grew up with as heroes, people like Fannie Lou Hamer, for example, who 60 years ago challenged her own party, the Democratic Party, for political engagement and representation. And people like, of course, Barbara Jordan, my neighbor from Texas, who really stood up to Watergate and tested the American public's commitment to democracy and came out really with evidence that democracy is safe and secure because it was safe and secure because people like her were going to preserve it for all of us. And then, of course, Shirley Chisholm.
Woo!
You know, you talk about the audacity of Hope. That was the audacity of Hope, running for president when people didn't really give her a chance or some people didn't take her seriously. But she did it. And even though she wasn't successful in terms of the nominee, she was able to inspire people about the possibilities for their lives and about the possibility for their political ambitions. And so this is a moment that we should look back on and look at the people like Gloria Steinem and look at people who have paved the way. I mean, the other night I was watching the floor on TV, and I saw Dolores Huerta, who people who have moved us to this point, and we're not turning back.
So 2 nights ago, former First Lady Michelle Obama talked about the ugly, misogynistic, racist lies that await Vice President Kamala Harris kind of after the convention, even though it's always happening right now. And when she said that, I thought about your experience when you came forward and testified for the Senate Judiciary Committee in 1991. And for many of us, and I think for many people in the nation, you were like the first, most obvious public victim of racist, misogynistic lies that was discrediting you and to discredit your testimony. And so I was curious, how are you thinking about the ways in which these forces are still operating? And then what is it that you hope that we've learned from your experience and that we can use to arm ourselves to protect each other, but also to kind of, in a way, protect Vice President Kamala Harris as she's moving forward?
You know, it's really tragic, really, when you see the kind of language that is being used, the way that people are trying to reconstruct her, this very, very talented and strong leader, and how they always fall back on the same old sexist and racist tropes. And I think about 1991, and yes, the vitriol and the anger and the sheer meanness and dishonesty of it. I know, though, that now we are in a different place. I mean, there was, like, in 1991, I think people didn't know what to do with that kind of language. Yeah. And in some ways, it was so familiar that they just kind of took it as that for truth. And when David Brock wrote his book, you know, calling me a little nutty and a little slutty, people assumed it became a bestseller.
Yeah.
You know, but today, I think we have gone through a change. And part of that change happened that weeks after, not even weeks, maybe a week or so after the hearing ended, the group of women, black feminists, came forward and put that kind of language and treatment in perspective and said that, you know, the hearing wasn't just about the high-tech lynching of a black man. The hearing had to be looked at as part of a discussion about what black women had suffered throughout history. And that was, I think, the beginning of a different understanding of how these kinds of messages are used against us. And they're used against all of us in one form or fashion. It's not just that they were talking about me. They were talking about every woman who dared open her mouth about sexual abuse that she had experienced. And every woman who was not to be believed because, of course, the men who they were talking about were more important than she was. And so we have retrained, I think, the American public.
Yeah.
We have trained them to understand that this is a tactic, a tool of oppression.
Yeah.
And I think the amazing thing is that it's not just bought by one segment of society, that women and people who identify as women and people who identify as non-binary in particular are now understanding that this is about you too, in your life, in your experiences, and have shown that it is relatable to a bigger audience. And that's the beauty of really where we are today.
Yeah.
Now, that's one thing. But what we have to also understand is that social media is very often not our friend, because that's how, that's the way, the platform for transferring all of this faulty information. And we have to be concerned about AI, because AI is producing those kinds of lies about who we are and the reality of our experiences. So all I would say is this, in response to 1991, but also in response to the place where we are right now. So we know now that Kamala Harris is going to be pilloried. We know that. And much of it will be sexist, and much of it will be racist, and the rest of it's going to be intersectional.
Yeah.
And so what we really need to do is to start to I think the one way to respond to it is really to vote her into office.
Yeah.
Vote her. Just show the world that those tactics will no longer work. And if we vote her into office, they're going to have to come up with a new tool, because they're only doing it to destroy her. And if it doesn't destroy her, they will come up with something else. But I think we also need to take issue with this kind of behavior, because we have a generation of young people who are poised to be leaders.
Yeah.
But we also have people who are afraid to even try to become a leader because they don't want to go through this kind of treatment and abuse, and they don't deserve to have to go through it. So there are two reasons that we need to elect Kamala Harris, at least two. But in relation to gender violence, this is a moment that we are going to have to hold those people accountable for the disinformation that they are spreading about us and who we are and our value to society.
Yeah, so one of the, consistent themes of this convention, for the first time in history, is her record in terms of prosecuting people who are sexually assaulted, children and other adults. And so I was curious for you, and you've talked about this, that your whole life's work is this, but what does it mean to also have, at the highest levels of the administration, people who take this, who spent their life fighting this as well? What is the optimism you have, and then what do you foresee as something that we should pay attention to and hold people accountable to as well?
Well, one of the things that I think people have missed is the fact that the Biden-Harris administration was the first to put forward a plan to end gender-based violence. There is no president had ever taken that on. No vice president had ever taken it on. It was never part of the agenda of this nation. And it's a long time coming, and it's definitely needed. But what I want us to know is that it's just the beginning. It's just the beginning There are some important things that are coming out that are happening around the country in terms of gender-based violence. One, of course, is we're now looking more at prevention. Prevention is essential. We're looking at prevention, and I think that one of the things that is missing is that we aren't starting early enough. We need to start with children. And that doesn't mean that we teach children, like they're adults. But we do need to recognize that there is behavior that goes on among children that follows them for the rest of their lives. And that it's just sort of gets escalated into sexual violence and traumatic experiences. And that's why I think prevention is so important for us. There's a group that I had spoken to out in Omaha, the Omaha Fund for Women. And they use sex education training to help children understand that the kind of behavior, the bullying behavior, and the taking girls' bra straps and the kinds of things that you see as very familiar in schools is not something that should continue. So they do this behavior, and people say, well, is that really important? But what I came to understand about their program was that they are literally saving the lives of some children, in particular children who are being bullied, boys who are being bullied because they're not masculine, or girls that are being bullied because they're too masculine, trans children in particular, and so this is an important part of our work that needs to be even escalated for the future.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many things that are happening out there in the world. And I mean so many solutions and ways of changing the systems and changing the structures. You mentioned the prosecutions, the criminal prosecutions for sexual assault. Those rules are changing. They're not changing quickly enough, and it's not happening without some challenging aspects to it. We know that Harvey Weinstein's conviction was reversed in a higher court. But nevertheless, the movement to change the systems so that women's voices will be heard is real, and it's happening. And I think that we all can be a part of it, but of course we need the federal government to be a part of it. And that's why this plan to end gender-based violence is so important.
Yeah.
And there are other reasons too.
No, it's amazing. So I have two questions. And I know we have competing sounds here, so you've been doing a brilliant job. The question, one of the things that I think came about or became part of the public's consciousness with your testimony was, and we talked about this a little bit, was the way in which people couldn't hold race and gender simultaneously, right? And as a Black feminist activist and writer, I feel like I've spent my career trying to really convince people that you can hold multiple ideas at the same time, that people can be oppressed by multiple systems at once. And now I feel like we're in this, one of the things that was miraculous about the response to Kamala Harris's ascension was these breakout groups or these organizing groups when all of these people like Black women, Black men, white dudes, white women, cat ladies, or all these different groups emerged, and it seemed like for the first time, I always thought that the right was really good at understanding how you can do multiple forms of oppression at once, right? You can be against abortion, and you can be against trans rights, and you can, also be against affirmative action. Like the same people can do all of that. And I always thought that the left had difficulty really understanding how to do coalition building around multiple intersectionality, multiple identities. And yet you saw this moment when people got online and they started fundraising and they started embracing their multiple identities. And I was curious for you, how did you experience that moment that's come out of Black feminism? We're not going to always name it as such, but it is the moment that we're in, and that the Democratic Party's finally caught up to the people, to the black women who've been the base of the party this entire time. How did you experience
Well,
this?
first of all, let me just say about Vance. I am a cat lady, okay? I don't even own a cat, but I'm the cat lady that he's talking about. But I prefer to think of myself as a cat woman.
Okay. Oh, okay. I like cat woman.
So that's, if you look at it, we are tough. We are hanging in there, and we know what work needs to be done, and we know our competency to do it. But let me tell you, this whole idea that you're talking about now, where people are finally coming together and thinking about multiple things at once, it is what I like to think of, and what Derek Bell has called interest conversion. Finally, we're starting to see that the idea of bodily autonomy includes, our claim to bodily autonomy includes reproductive justice, as well as freedom from gender-based violence. We have to understand that these are bigger umbrellas. Okay, so when they go loud, I go louder. So we now, and I think the Supreme Court has put us in this position.
Yes.
They have now so marginalized the rights of so many different groups of people that we need to come together. We're not all the same identity, but what is at stake is about rights in general. They don't like the idea of rights for people who are marginalized. They like the idea of rights for the very wealthy mega donors that they have. But what we're seeing now is that the decisions made by the court are really bringing together groups of people who might not have been brought together before.
Yeah.
And that is what I think will be the energy behind not only this election, presidential election, but the election for House and Senate and throughout, because that's the energy behind the efforts to reform the court. And there are enough of us. We are the majority at this point. And there are enough of us that if we get out and we vote and we understand that our fates are truly linked together, that we can have the kind of country that recognizes rights, that recognizes that certain populations are privileged well beyond the point that they should be, that recognizes really that the future of our democracy depends on an inclusive community that preserves and protects the rights of everyone. And that is why I think we're thinking about things differently now.
Yeah.
We're moving in a different way. And it is a part of the evolution, I think, of conversations that have been happening for years and years.
Yeah.
And this is really a culmination of those conversations. Let's not let it end here, folks. Let's not let it end here.
So my very last question, when we did the podcast, we had the opportunity to interview Senator Carol Moseley Braun, Illinois' greatest. Obama's great, but she's really great. And one of the things she said was that she ran inspired by you, right? And that infamous Year of the Woman, and became the first black woman senator in the United States. And then she has that joke that with Biden, when he invites her to be in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he's mentoring her, and she says, "Well, you're just doing this because of Anita Hill, right?" And he never finds it funny, and it's a whole thing. But she recently has been interviewed about him and talking about his evolution, perhaps, on these issues. I know in 2019, the New York Times reported that you had a conversation with him, and you said something really profound. It wasn't about him apologizing or not apologizing to you, but really apologizing to the American people, and restoring trust in this process for victims of sexual harassment or victims of gender-based violence in our highest, institutions of government. And so I'm curious for you, do you see this moment that we have and the evolution even of this particular political campaign as a moment perhaps in which trust can be restored?
I think it already is a moment where trust is being restored. Honestly, I think just getting to this day, when Carol Moseley Braun was elected, my mother said she never thought she would see the day when there'd be a black woman senator.
Oh.
She was 80 years old.
God.
She was born in 1911. So you could imagine all the things that she had seen and what she thought the world would be like.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that I thought I would see this day.
Yeah.
But it's happening. And it's not happening by chance. And it won't continue to happen unless we continue to nurture it and build on it and build on the things that brought us to this day.
Yeah.
So I think, this is a time where we will, I think, can and should, and if we are doing our job, will emerge with more trust in our democracy. This is a moment when we can maybe tell our grandchildren, I don't have children, but if I had grandchildren, this is a story that I would tell them, that this was a moment when the country looked itself in the mirror and said, we can do better. We can do better. We can be more inclusive. We can be more protective. We can be really the kind of country that has a true democracy where everyone can participate. There's so many things that I could talk about with the Supreme Court. But the idea that we have now in 2024 still have states that really do everything that they can to suppress minority vote. The idea that we are still litigating those issues is truly disturbing. The idea that we have states now that are going to be monitoring the pregnancies of women to see if they are having abortions. The idea that we are going to eliminate the Department of Education because we think colleges are too liberal in terms of their thinking, or that we're going to get rid of DEI or critical race theory or ban books. That idea is so troubling. And when and I don't get too political because I work in a place where that's my thing is knowledge and knowledge production. But I have to ask myself the question at this moment, who can you trust to put those issues before the public and resolve them? The people who are promoting this idea that, people can be disenfranchised, that women can have their pregnancies monitored, the books about our children, that our children read, need to be somehow censored because they tell the stories about people who are not like them. Whose hands do you want to put those issues in today? We are facing them, and they are not good for our society. And do you, honestly, do you trust someone like Donald Trump to determine what kind of and how we're going to combat gender-based violence. Honestly, this is someone who is admitted behaving, sexually assaulting people, and is sure that nothing will be done. Is that the kind of leadership that you want on just this issue alone? So just this issue alone, for me, is enough to get me out and get me voting and moving in a different direction than even the court is taking us. And so I would say, just keep thinking, this is a talk about gender-based violence. It is also a talk about voting rights. It's also a talk about how our children are going to be educated. It's a talk about abortion rights. It's about all of those things. Yeah. And those interests are coming together. And I think that what we have for our future really is an outlook that will make us smile and a country that we can pass on gladly to our children and grandchildren.
Thank you. Thank you. Aww.
Thank you.